Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is April 16th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope everyone is doing well out there today. A couple stories I want to discuss today is a very brief update to Brexit. I know yesterday we didn't talk about it, and everybody was thankful for that, including myself. There wasn't a lot of news that came out in regards, and we had some other topics that I wanted to discuss yesterday, so we sort of sidestepped Brexit. But briefly, I want to touch on Brexit. And then also, I want to talk about a survey regarding President Trump and his 2020 campaign. This is something that my family actually received in the mail from the Republican National Committee, and I just want to go over some of the questions that were asked on this survey and some of the questions that were not asked on this survey. But first, to Brexit. So this was predicted here by us at the Capital News, which again this isn't surprising. We've been paying attention to this, so we anticipated this was going to be the case. Recall that the Prime Minister, Theresa May, was flying all over Europe, particularly to meet Angela Merkel of Germany, and then she flew to France to see President Macron to basically beg for mercy, for forgiveness, for an extension. And all the while, we were asking the question here, well, why couldn't she just pick up the phone? And if she really wanted to see them, couldn't they just do a video conference? I mean, why does she have to fly back and forth all these places? In the meantime, she was supposed to be negotiating this grand bargain with the Labour Party, and in particular with Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party. Well, we say, well, this just doesn't make sense. I mean, she must be saying pretty much to those efforts to negotiate in-house, meaning with Parliament, with British people, not with the French and the Germans in the EU, but actually with the British people and their representatives, whether or not you like them or not. That's what you said you were going to do. So why are you flying all over the place? Well, it was because you didn't want to work with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. That was no surprise here to us. It really shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody. But now you have these negotiations. They're at a standstill. They are at a standstill. Again, here, not surprised. So where does this leave us? Well, it just leaves us where we were last week, where we have the new extension all the way out until Halloween of this year. So again, trick or treat, what's going to take place. Now, the other thing that's interesting, of course, a deal could be struck prior to that. And if you listen to Theresa May, she wants it to be before that. She wants it to be even before May 23rd, which again is the voting day for the EU parliamentary elections. So she wants that to be done. However, she could have left on March 29th, the original deadline. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to run through all of the important steps along the way that we talk about here all the time, but you know them. So they could have left. They should have left. So this prime minister has made promises to leave. Would she rather leave with a deal? Yes. Would Parliament rather leave with a deal? Yes. But guess what? If you can't come to an agreement, then you leave because that was the will and the voice and the vote of the people. So she's now sidestepping Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. I'm not going to say that I blame her for doing so, but, don't make the agreement to make an agreement with that party then. Just say, you know what, I'm going to go beg and grovel, and I'm going to say, we need an extension, have mercy on us. And that's what she did, and that's what she got. Now, was it as long as what some members of the EU wanted? No. Donald Tusk, the president of the EU Council, wanted it to go out for a year, until next March of 2020. Then you had Theresa May, who said, well, just give me my original extension that I wanted to, the one I originally begged for, June 30th. And they said, well, that's not enough time. So they met in the middle. And so the new deadline is October 31st. Happy Halloween. Now, what's also interesting, and we had this discussion, is Nigel Farage, a major proponent of Brexit, the former leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP, who is also a member of the European Parliament, who has been a thorn in their side since he's been there for 15, 20 years, a major Eurosceptic, somebody who believes in the sovereignty of the people and the British people, as he does really for the rest of the remaining countries that comprise the European Union. So now he's out, starting his own new political party, the Brexit Party, which we discussed last week. And now you're starting to have members within the European Union, the EU Parliament, starting to voice their concerns. Because Nigel Farage, while it may have taken him a decade and a half, 2 decades to win, he won. He wanted Brexit since day one. He didn't want to be a part of the European Union. He didn't believe in it from an economic standpoint. He didn't believe in it from a democratic political standpoint. He wanted out. Okay? Now, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Some might agree with him, some might not, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, he's a thorn in their side. He is a major Eurosceptic. And he won in 2016 during that Brexit referendum. So now you have members of the EU Parliament voicing their concerns, particularly with Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker, the leaders of the EU, if you will, and basically saying, look, this extension, this is getting ridiculous because now it's more and more likely that this can will get kicked all the way down until October 31st. And what does this mean? Well, it means that the British people are going to take part in the EU parliamentary elections. And what does that mean? Because now you have the likes of people waking up and being so upset, people like Nigel Farage starting a new political party, who are just going to get more and more people elected to the EU Parliament. So now everybody's worried. Well, we can't have 50 Nigel Farages here. One is enough as it is. You know, we can't have 50 of them. And this isn't just a concern in regards to the British people. Remember, there's a lot of concern throughout Europe with rising populism, with people now more and more skeptical of this quote-unquote European project. So even if the British people, by some miracle, come up with a deal prior to the EU parliamentary elections on May 23rd, and they leave and Brexit takes place, they're still going to be concerned with some other Eurosceptics and populists coming into the EU Parliament from other countries throughout Europe. So they have other fish to fry, and they do. And I would love to talk about a whole bunch of other issues that exist. But again, this program finds this integral to the institution of democracy, which is why I talk about it. The economics, it'll be bumpy. We'll get through it. That's going to be fine. It's the institution of democracy that is under direct threat here, and that's what I'm most concerned with. I think, realistically, that's most concern of what Nigel Farage is concerned with and has been spending the past 20 years of his life defending and advocating for. So people are getting nervous. They want a resolution to all of this, as do I, as do you, as do the British people, as does everybody, because this does nobody any good continually to kick the can further and further down the road. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I would be very surprised if Theresa May and British Parliament can come up and to agree a deal prior to May 23rd. I would be extremely surprised. I hope they do, but I will be extremely surprised. So unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about this for another month and a half, probably until Halloween. I mean, I'm going to go crazy by then, but I'm going to do it because we have to talk about it. But in the meantime, it's going to get rather interesting, especially if a deal is not agreed, because the likes of Nigel Farage, boy, is he going to make for some entertaining news, believe you me. He will. And not only him, but many other members of the Brexit Party that will likely become elected to the EU Parliament. And then who knows what will happen in British politics at large regarding a general election. Because you might have the Brexit Party really catching on over there. Now, that's obviously the hopes and intentions of somebody like Nigel Farage or anybody who's starting a new political party that they think they're the best capable party out there. But nevertheless, I mean, you have enough people, all worked up about this on this one particular issue and a whole host of other things to go along with it. It could throw a wrench into British politics, and now you start to have somebody who voted to leave actually in charge of making some decisions. Because you have to remember, most members of Parliament voted to remain. You have Jeremy Corbyn, who voted to remain. Even Theresa May, the Prime Minister, voted to remain. At least she is saying, and again, I give her a lot of credit for at least saying that, so what I voted for, the winners are the people who voted to leave, and we have to deliver on that referendum. So I'll keep you posted, but that's the update for today. Now, to the Trump Agenda Survey. Again, this is from the Republican National Committee. And just so you know, once you turn it over and you look at the bottom in the fine print, it says not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. Okay? But nevertheless, this is a Trump Agenda Survey. And this goes through and it asks multiple questions, and it wants you to rank them pretty much, in order of importance. And so I'm just going to go through this list. We'll see how many we get through. I'm sure we can get through all of them today. But this is, again, not only paying attention to what is here, but I think more importantly in this instance, what is not here. Okay? So here's the question. Please rank the following issues according to the importance you believe they should have as President Trump and Republicans work to keep America great, with one being most important. All right, here's the first point. Build a border wall to stop illegal immigration and drug smuggling from Mexico. I thought we were already doing that. So why does this need to be a major point of discussion for 2020? Okay? Now, it's something that got his base all wound up in 2016. I get it. But obviously, I thought this was being handled. This was executive orders. This was moving money around through the federal government, things that could get done. Will some of this be challenged? Yes, we know this, but some of it will not be. Okay, so again, now this is just their opinion. These are the points they're putting out there. I'm attacking these things, obviously, but nevertheless, why would that be on there? Only because it's basically a dog whistle, if you will, because that's what the base got all wound up for. But I thought it was being handled. So why does this need to be number one in 2020? It doesn't, not on our list. Next, develop and implement a plan to rebuild crumbling and aging infrastructure. This is an important issue. This has been something that also has been kicked down further and further down the road because politicians don't want to deal with it. Nobody wants to deal with it. It's not a sexy project. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles and shiny objects to look at. It just doesn't. I mean, you can look at a bridge. I mean, most bridges aren't the Brooklyn Bridge or anything like that. I mean, it's just a bridge. It's steel, it's concrete, hopefully a good paint job, and that's it, right? I mean, it's there to serve its purpose, and then you have a lot of infrastructure that most people never even see, whether that's wastewater treatment, whether, sewage plants, or whether it's the actual pipes underground that nobody sees. I mean, so it's not something that a lot of politicians can point and say, look what we did. I mean, it's fantastic, isn't it? It's just not something there. Now, again, when you look at the American Society of Civil Engineers, when you look at their reports, I believe the last time I looked at it, they gave the U.S. infrastructure a grade of a D+, D-, D-, one of them. And they, according to them, I believe it was to get to a B, the United States would have to spend about $3 trillion. Now, you have to remember, folks, the U.S. government brings in about $3 trillion a year. So we would have to spend an entire year's worth of tax revenue and everything that goes to the Treasury out on infrastructure just to get to a B. Not even an A, to a B. Now, of course, that's probably by, developed country standards. I mean, we have a lot of things that are crumbling, but it's still a lot better than a lot of countries around the world. Now, that's not how it's supposed to be in the greatest, most exceptional country in the world, but that's where we stand. So, develop and implement a plan to rebuild crumbling and aging infrastructure. That's important. It's not number one on our list, but it is important and it needs to be done. And I honestly think if there's anything that can be done over the course of the next year and a half prior to the 2020 presidential election, this is something where you may be able to get Democrats and Republicans on board to actually do something. The question will be, how effective will it be? Because remember, you had President Obama in there with all those quote-unquote shovel-ready jobs, which none of them were shovel-ready, and none of them got done. And if they did, they were over budget, and it was just a waste of money. So if something can be done, let's hope for the best that at least somewhere these politicians can get together. Now, we know over the course of at least the next month, this just ain't going to happen because of the Bob Mueller report being released and a whole host of other things coming. So there's going to be a lot of finger pointing. The president and his legal team are most likely going to answer that with their own conclusion. So this is going to be back and forth for at least a month, and then we'll see what happens following that three-ring circus. So don't hold your breath, but let's be hopeful that at least the crumbling and aging infrastructure can be addressed. But at least for the purpose of this survey, it is not number one. Next point, fully enforce our immigration laws and withhold federal funding from sanctuary cities. Well, this is something that should be done regardless. This is not number one by any stretch of the imagination either. So is this an issue? Sure it is. If the federal government is being incompetent or derelict in their duty, I mean, that's something that always needs to be addressed, but this has been the case for going on 30 years. This longer than that, since Reagan. I mean, nobody is taking the bull by the horns and solving it. Now, at least you give some credit to President Trump for bringing this up, making it an integral part of his 2016 campaign and even his presidency, and fighting both Republicans and Democrats on it, and getting some border wall built, and hopefully getting some more personnel on the border, and whatever the men and women who are on the border, what they need. I mean, just give them what they need. Obviously, it has to be reasonable and make sense, but I mean, I don't think most of those border agents are here to rip off the American people. I think they just want to do a good job, and they need the tools necessary to do it. So this is on Congress for being ineffective. This is on the executive branch for being ineffective. And again, I'm not picking on Donald Trump on this one, because this is something that hasn't been dealt with. This is the same thing like infrastructure. It hasn't been dealt with for 30 years. So it's no surprise that it's crumbling. So this is just the state of affairs of this country. But fully enforce our immigration laws and withhold federal funding from sanctuary cities. I mean, that's just a political point. That has nothing structurally to do with what's wrong with this country. So so far, these points are not really good. I mean, I hope the Republican National Committee comes up with something a little bit better. Sanctuary cities, we talked about that yesterday. Again, that was a political ploy by the president, and I applauded him on it for a good political chess move, because he made the Democrats put their money where their mouths are, and it just showed them once again how hypocritical they are. Because, yeah, let's put them in buses and send them to San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, wherever, Portland, Oregon. Let's just do it. Oh, no, we can't do that, Mr. President. You don't have the authority to do that, and we don't want them. Oh, but you said you did. All right. Next point. Fix our broken healthcare system, protecting pre-existing conditions, and improving costs and access to doctors of your choice. We talk about this all the time here. I have an article on the Capitol News. Some of you have read it. If you haven't, check it out. It's been up there, I think, since last month. I do not want the Republican Party or any political party to be the party of healthcare, because this is what happens. This is what the Republican National Committee will send out, the RNC, and this is what the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, is going to send out. It's going to be survey after survey with let's fix our healthcare system, because somebody is always going to have a problem with the healthcare system. It's 17% of the U.S. economy, 17% of GDP. That is enormous. There is always going to be a handful of people who have problems and concerns with the healthcare system. This is why the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and any political party for that matter, should not be involved with healthcare, health insurance, medical care, delivery, cost, anything. This is the problem, because it becomes a political football, back and forth. It's the Republicans, so if you're a Republican, you like it. If you're a Democrat and the Democrat comes up with something, you like it. Well, guess what? Republicans don't always control the White House, the Congress, and the Senate. Likewise, Democrats don't always control the White House, the Congress, and the Senate. So what do you think's going to happen, folks? I mean, put your thinking cap on and get out of the bubble that you're in, thinking that, well, it's the Republicans, they can do no harm, and it's the Democrats, well, I'm a Democrat, they can do no wrong. No. They all do harm every single day. Why do you want something that is so crucial and so personal to you and your family to be in the hands of politicians? Because as soon as one party gains control, they're going to try to undermine what has been done by the other. This is back and forth. You're crazy to think that either party has a solution. They are the problem. And now again, we've even had the discussion of protecting pre-existing conditions. Again, I understand the emotional argument of it, but now you're starting to get in and telling businesses what they can and cannot do. That's socialism. When you control the means of production and you tell corporations what they can and cannot do, that is socialism, okay? We're not supposed to be a socialistic country. The president said it himself during the State of the Union this year. So I don't like it at all. So this is definitely not number one. This shouldn't even be on the list, because all this is going to do is cause more and more angst. Because look, we're already in the midst of another political debate, and even a legal debate as far as healthcare is concerned, because now you have the constitutionality of it being up for grabs once again. It's going to be struck down, in my opinion. So again, we've had 9 years of the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare. Now it's likely to get struck down. And now you're going to have the Republicans maybe put something together. Of course, the president was out not too long ago, and we had podcast episodes on this, saying that he wants to be the party of healthcare. The Republican Party should be the party of healthcare. And in addition, he wanted to get something passed before. But no, even Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, said, no, Mr. President, I mean, this is not going to get done before 2020 elections. I mean, how's it going to get through Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the House? I mean, come on. That was just a rookie mistake there to not see that one coming. But they shouldn't even be working on this. They should be working on a way to get everything repealed, but it need not be replaced. Let the free market solve the problem. It will. Next point, confirm more federal judges who pledge to follow the original intent of the Constitution. Why don't we have politicians who read the Constitution and understand the Constitution? Why don't we start with that? This is nowhere near being number one. Confirm more federal judges. If we have the mess that we already have, what is this going to make a difference of? Judges aren't supposed to make law, supposed to interpret law. They're not even supposed to enforce it. That's the executive branch's role. They're supposed to interpret it. This would be something that would be more important if those were our biggest problems. Not even anywhere near it. So this is just a political talking point. I mean, do I want more judges on there who have the original intent of the Constitution in mind? Yeah. But we got a lot more bigger problems to deal with than who's sitting on what bench, because if you don't have an economy, what difference does it make? So that shouldn't be on this list either. Next point, continue to re-equip and rebuild our military. This is another dog whistle. Children and the vets, right? I mean, in the military. What you can't do any wrong. We've spent now, don't forget this, over the last counting this year, this will be 3 years of the Trump administration, you're going to be over $2 trillion in defense spending. Over $2 trillion. And remember, even according to their own budget for 2020, the $4.75 trillion monstrosity, they're giving more money to the DOD than what the DOD even requested. Now, again, this has to go through Congress. Congress controls the purse strings, but nevertheless, $2 trillion coming from the Trump administration to rebuild the military. How much more do they want? How much more do they need? This is why the military-industrial complex is alive and well. Again, this is part of the swamp. Is the swamp being drained? No. So I don't think that that's the most important point either. Do we need a strong military? Absolutely. That's common sense. That shouldn't even be a question. But for those of you who may be joining me and not knowing my stance on those things, yes, we need a strong military and capable military, and one that people wouldn't even think about attacking. But $2 trillion, it's a lot of money in the course of 3 years. All right? I mean, what are they doing with that money if they're not revamped and retooled by now? So that's not number one on my list either. Next point, stand up for our veterans by improving their benefits and access to service. Again, this shouldn't even be a question. This shouldn't be a question. People going overseas getting their legs and limbs blown off, and then they come back here and you have to watch television and see commercial after commercial about veterans and charities. Why are there charities for veterans? I mean, they shouldn't have to exist. This country should have these veterans and their families taken care of, period, end of discussion. This shouldn't even be a debate. I mean, thank God for these charities and these people out there who help these veterans and their families. But my goodness, in all honesty, they shouldn't even have to exist. This is something the government should take care of, no question about it. So that's a disgusting point. Does that need to be taken care of? It sure does, because look at the suicide rate on veterans. It's above the average of non-veterans, so it's just disgusting. So that's something that needs to be discussed, but that's not point number one to me either. Next, encourage domestic exploration and production of domestic energy sources. Again, this is a political talking point. This is for the free market. What does the government have to do with this if it has to deal with regulations? Well, deregulate. The president's already deregulating. The United States is already one of the largest producers of oil and natural gas. So this is a non-starter. This does not need to be on the list. renegotiate trade deals to put American jobs and interests first. This, again, is a talking point from 2016, and supposedly the president is in the midst of making the best deals ever. I don't know which one's going to trump which one, because you have NAFTA 2.0, the USMCA, which is supposed to be the best thing since sliced bread. You have the trade agreement supposedly with the South Koreans. He got us out of TPP. He's supposedly going to make a historic deal with the United States and China, although that's on the back burner now. And now you're in another trade war between the U.S. and the European Union. And folks, if you look at the actual data, our trade deficits are getting worse, not better. So we are not winning these trade wars or whatever the hell we're doing. So look at the numbers. It ain't pretty. So you want to renegotiate trade deals? Go ahead, knock yourself out. Knock yourself out. I don't know what a lot of it's going to do when we get into having a further discussion as we move forward in subsequent podcasts. And this will be a theme that we'll be discussing probably on both the geopolitical podcast and the economic podcast, and that has to deal with artificial intelligence, because a lot of jobs are going to go by the wayside. I'm sorry to tell you, that's just what's going to happen due to technological advancement. Again, that's not a conversation, a national conversation that's taking place, and it's not likely to take place during this next campaign. It'll be discussed, but it'll be so far over the heads of most Americans, it's going to be pathetic. So that's something that we're going to be mindful of. But, I mean, have your trade deals. Talk it out. I mean, I'm all for trade, peace and prosperity, and talking with people. It's better to talk and trade with people than it is to kill each other. So I'm all for that. But this is a 2016 talking point. I mean, you're in the midst of trade deals. Get them done. So that ain't point number one for me either. Now, next we have make the historic Republican-passed tax cuts and reforms permanent. I am all for a tax cut, but you got to pay for it. The Republicans didn't pay for this last tax cut, and that's why you have trillion-dollar deficits. And that's why you have a budget that was put out there, again, the $4.75 trillion monstrosity that predicts trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see, at the end of a business cycle, at the end of a credit cycle, in the midst of what we're told is an economic miracle, the best economy ever. So that stuff just doesn't jive. So I'm all for tax cuts. I'm all for deregulation. I'm all for all sorts of reforms. Again, if you really follow me, you know that the solutions to all of these problems, and a big start to solving all these problems, is to end the Federal Reserve and to abolish the income tax. So I'm all for tax cuts. I'm for getting rid of the income tax. So that's important. But you got to pay for it in one way or the other. They're just not cutting spending. Why? Because it'll have a negative effect on GDP. And when you're the best economy in the world, you can't have a slowing GDP. Next, cut job-killing regulations to keep the economy growing. Yeah, we're all for that. Is that number one? I mean, it's part of it, I guess. It's part of the overall solution. But that's already been taking place. Is that something that needs to be maintained going forward? Is that the biggest issue that's going to be on the minds of most Americans? Probably not. That's something that's more on the lines of small business owners in particular, corporate America. So that's not middle America. Most people probably aren't going to say that that's the most important thing. And then lastly, we have other. And then it's a fill in the blank. You make up your choice. And so, I mean, that's really where I would stand. And that's ending the Federal Reserve, making that a national conversation, abolishing the income tax. And why don't we talk about the national debt? This is from the Republican National Committee. I thought these were supposed to be the fiscal conservatives. These were supposed to be the financial adults in the room. Why aren't we talking about the $22 trillion in debt and growing? Why isn't that on here? It's not even on here. You would have to put that in. What about the $1 trillion deficits? Why isn't that on there? What about the entitlement spending? What about the $1 trillion in spending for Social Security? What about the $1 trillion in spending that goes to Medicare and Medicaid? What about the aging demographics that is just going to make those outflows balloon over the next couple of decades as boomers retire and retire and retire? Where's the conversation? It's not there. So this, to me, is a disgrace from the Republican National Committee. So they're not taking any of this stuff seriously either. They're basically rehashing 2016 talking points and throwing in something that has to do with health care, which, again, is going to be front and center because the Democrats want to own it. So this is despicable. Not to be surprised, again, for those of you who may be joining me for the first time, thanks for joining, but I am not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a libertarian. The two-party system is terrible. It's led to $22 trillion in debt and growing, $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Again, that's not on here. Nobody's discussing this. I guess it's just going to miraculously solve itself. So these politicians, these national parties don't want to take anything seriously. They just want the talking points. They just want the Republican talking points, cut taxes, deregulate. Okay, that's part of it. And then you have the Democrats. Let's impeach Trump and give free crap to everybody. I mean, this is where we are. This is the United States of America in the 21st century. Nobody wants to take anything seriously until we're not going to have a choice. But that's where I'm going to leave it for today, and we will most definitely continue this conversation because these are going to be major points throughout this year in 2020 and beyond, whether or not politicians talk about them. And it's my job to talk about them because this is what is important. Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a pleasure having you as always. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out. Leave your comments. I'd love to hear from you. This is the Capitol News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.